Yeah, the balance of cortisol and melatonin is really the key to sleep.
The crazy thing is, at night, our body is even more sensitive to light and food because they're trying to figure out like, okay, should I stay up? Is there an emergency?
It's not just that these genetic traits make you wake up earlier or fall asleep earlier or later, or as the case may be, but it's a roadmap for your entire hormonal set.
You feel exhausted, but it's more than exhaustion. It's like this brain fog, and it's this moodiness, and it's these like there's all this other stuff going on besides just feeling tired. That's how our bodies feel all the time. We're jet lagged and we're feeling exhausted because the crazy thing is, at night, our body is even more sensitive to light and food because they're trying to figure out like, okay, should I stay up? Is there an emergency? Is he running away from some danger? Because it has to stay hypervigilant if that's the case. And when we're blasting ourselves with blue light and eating and doing all kinds of things, the body's registering that, okay, we need to stay up because there's something bad. Repair and renewal is paused, and we do not turn on those genes because we're thinking that the body needs to stay awake because we need to run away. There's some kind of emergency situation. So we're really shortchanging our repair and renewal processes when we're doing all of this. And I always say, like, if there's smart entrepreneurs, these tech people, can't we figure out ways to actually change technology? Like in the last 10 years, that's when we've all been doing all these bad things. I hope that in the next 10 years, we can figure out ways to decrease the amount of blue light we get at night and maybe increase the amount of natural light we get during the day so that we can actually take control of our bodies and get more energy and like not shortchange ourselves and accelerate disease, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we have like the night shift settings on our phones, right?
Yeah.
Which people have told me that that's actually not that effective, although it feels effective
Yeah.
because the minute you take it off night mode,
Yes.
you're
It
like,
feels like, oh my God,
you're
it's so
like,
bright.
whoa.
Yeah.
So I use that, but so I feel like that's like sort of a halfway measure. I wish my TV would do that as well. I don't know why big TV manufacturers haven't.
They
figured
should
out.
do that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is ambient light in the room. So I didn't know that, having ambient light in the room is really a metabolism killer. So they had in weight loss studies, they've very well established that people that sleep with ambient light have more trouble losing weight when they do diet studies than people who sleep in a dark blackout room. For me, it's like, that's the easiest measure. I mean, it's free for most people. You could wear, or very inexpensive, you could wear a face mask or eye mask. These are things, I mean, we're trying all these diet pills and all these shortcuts. Like, why not do things that are actually 100% effective in helping you lose weight or help your metabolism?
I agree. Guys, if you need a good eye mask, we make them. Shameless plug for Genius Life merch. You can go to thegeniuslife.com. We have an eye mask. No, but so I want to ask you a question because this came up. My assistant, Sydney, asked me this recently about blackout curtains. So I love blackout curtains, but when you wake up, the thing that I don't like about blackout curtains is that it keeps the room pitch black in the morning, and I would much rather wake up with the sun. Yeah. So that you get that light in the morning as you're supposed to, as our ancestors arose with the rising of the sun, right? So are blackout curtains, would you recommend them, or do you think that there's like a better way to do this? Maybe, I don't know.
I think if we could think of a technology, I mean, we have so many cool people listening to this. There should be curtains that just automatically sense light and open, right?
I agree with that.
That would be so amazing.
That would be amazing.
So what I do is I wear an eye mask, but the basic deal is that once you decide your nightly routine and you decide on the hours that you want to sleep, try not to have that blaring alarm waking you up. I mean, I know it's so hard for most people to do, but I think if you start at least a few nights a week, if you're able to sleep in a dark room and then wake up naturally and then immediately or shortly thereafter, go get some sunlight, you're in good shape. So what I do on most mornings as a part of this whole journey that I was on, I wake up in the morning and I literally go brush my teeth I do kind of a little bit of a, wash up, change into my workout clothes, and then I step outside and I get the direct sunlight. So the sunlight you get through a window is 5 times less than what you would get in natural, even on a cloudy day. So you really do want that direct light. So we're talking about 10,000 lux even on a cloudy day and 100,000 lux on a sunny day, whereas a light gives you 1 to 2,000 lux. So turning on your lights in your room feels like, oh, I'm waking up, but it's really that natural light that you need exposed. It could be a minute. You just go outside. For me, oftentimes when I'm in a rush, I'm literally outside for a minute. I get my sunlight, I do a little self-reflection, and then I'm off. And so, ideally on days I'm off, I do a workout outdoors. I mean, that's the best, right? You feel like $1,000,000 after that and then break my fast. But then a lot of times, and that's what I did during the pandemic. But then now that gyms are open, some outdoor spaces are open, then doing a fasted workout and then breaking your fast is something that I think has really been transformative in my energy levels.
Okay, so let's talk about fasting. So you advocate for people starting with at least a 12-hour fasting window and, compressing their feeding window. For most people, it's about 16 hours, which is insane.
Yeah.
And you're saying just make it 12 hours.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of orient your day then around that?
So 2 to 3 hours before bed, stop eating. That's kind of the big, hard stop. You don't have to do it every day. I usually on the weekends spend time with friends or family and you're eating late into the night, and that's okay. You don't have to make this an all or nothing thing because there's something to be said about social connections, as we know this year. But on weekdays, I really make a very, very boundary-driven effort to end my meals 2 to 3 hours before bed. And then, so this is good for shift workers because some people ask me, well, I don't get home till, midnight, whatever bedtime is for you, if you can work backwards. Ideally, that would be sometime after sundown. If you really want to go ancestral and biologically absolutely correct, you probably want to do it sometime after sundown and then fast overnight. And in the morning, if you can do a fasted workout in nature, that would be ideal because then you're getting that blast of sunlight into your retina, which goes to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which fine tunes all the cells in your body to say like, okay, it's morning time to do metabolism, time to do thinking, complex tasks. When we're not getting that, we're always feeling kind of like down. Like that's why you need your coffee and your energy drinks because we're completely off. So then, you do the fasted workout. One of the big advantages of a fasted workout is you can deplete your glucose. So most people in America are completely dependent on simple sugars as their fuel, right? And even if you're not, but you still have a good amount of simple sugars like stored in your liver. So say you ate a pasta dinner, you're going to be burning that pasta all night long. And even in the morning, probably halfway through your workout, you're still burning that pasta, right? But if you have a pretty low processed sugar, processed carbohydrate diet, and you sleep overnight and you're doing a fast 2 to 3 hours before bed, you're going to deplete a lot of that blood glucose. And then your body's going to dip into the liver stores. And once you kind of dip into your liver stores and you go for a workout, then your body's going to have to start to look for alternative sources of fuel. And that back and forth switch between using sugar for fuel and using fat for fuel is the magic of intermittent fasting. So Dr. Mattson in the New England Journal of Medicine study that came out in 2019 basically said it's not just about caloric restriction, because we know caloric restriction can be good for people, longevity, metabolism, but this is more than that. There is things that are happening. And when the metabolic switch happens, that's when BDNF goes up. That's when you see all these anti-inflammatory benefits. You see all these downstream effects similar to exercise. Like, exercise is not about just, the muscle. That's the benefit. There's all these global benefits. And that happens when you metabolically switch. So the concept that I take is we don't know, we can't tell when you metabolically switch because you're doing it so rapidly back and forth. So one of the things I actually ask people to do is if you are comfortable with doing an overnight fast, then stretch it a little bit by doing a workout, which rapidly uses up the stored glucose. And then you're going to dip into that metabolic switch zone, which is the magic. And then you break your fast and you go on with your day.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about any potential downsides of fasting? Because I've talked quite a bit about fasting as of late on the podcast, and I really value the time and vigor that you've put into your research.
Yeah.
And we haven't really talked about any potential downsides in the past, but you also being a woman, I think, can bring a new voice to this.
Yeah.
Are there any, considerations that women need to have? Because, and I'm sure that you know this, and I'd be curious to know your thoughts as to why this is, but most of the research on fasting in humans, the clinical research, is done in men, right?
Yes.
Or postmenopausal women.
Yes.
So for premenopausal women that are listening, are there any potential downsides to this?
Yeah, there's lots. Okay. But Max, I want people to think of it like they think of exercise. There are risks to exercise, right? You don't want to be running a ultra marathon. Not everybody can do that. And so same thing with fasting. Not everybody wants or can do a 3-day water fast or a 5-day, water fast. So that being said, you would never, ever tell a woman you shouldn't exercise because oh yeah, there's this extreme form that could actually turn off fertility. That's exactly like intermittent fasting. Like you're actually confusing people and shortchanging people, those experts who say, oh, women should not fast, because that to people is now confusing. Now they're like, oh wait, I should go back to 16 hours a day eating because that was like better for me. But that's the disordered eating, right? So the consideration that I tell people, women of childbearing age, is that you are wired differently than men. And this is a fact. We are reproductive creatures. And what our body does to protect reproduction is to shut off the ovulatory cycle when it senses a lot of stress. And that can be from mental stress. That can be from famine. You don't want to give birth during a famine or a time of major stress. So female athletes know this way too well. They train really hard. And if they don't have a good amount of rest in between or recovery, they will lose their period. And fertility, people who are trying to get pregnant will deal with this all the time because mental stress can also stop those ovulatory cycles. And that's what happens with fasting. If you tell your brain that you're in a famine, it will turn that off. And there's one study that people quote. It is a 6-mouse study, so very tiny study, where they had mice fasting, female mice fasting every other day for 12 weeks. And they found that there was an effect on the ovaries and reproduction. But remember, mice are so different than humans. Their metabolism is 6 times our metabolism. So for them, fasting for 24 hours every other day, that's like us fasting for 6 days.
Wow.
So this is not the same. You can't equate it. Yeah, if I fasted for 6 days in a row and did that for months on end, I will definitely do a number on my hormones and many other things. So that's, I think, the real big take-home message is you can fast. Just take it easy. Do not go deep and aggressive when you first start, because some people can, and many women will text me, message me and say, I do great. I do the same thing as my boyfriend or husband, and they're doing great. But not everyone. And many women will notice that when they try to even do a 16-hour fast every single day off the bat, they're going to get hormonal effects. And I definitely felt that way. I saw somebody talking about fasting in the research. I was like, I'm all in. Like, I'm going to get an A+. So I started doing it every single day. And literally by day 3, I felt fatigued. I felt like my sleep was disturbed. I felt like my cravings were on fire. And luckily I pulled back because I knew that something wasn't right. But some people keep going with it and they really damaged their metabolism and their hormones in the long term.
So interesting. I really love that you brought sort of, you brought exercise into the equation, which is another form of hormesis, right?
Yeah.
Hormesis, which is, of course, beneficial stress.
Yes.
And it's up to each person, men and women, right, to figure out where that line is for them, right?
Yeah.
Where a stressor becomes too much stress. You got to walk that tightrope and discover for yourself, at what point, like where that stress is actually causing you to adapt in a beneficial way. And also, where it becomes counterproductive, where it becomes too stressful.
Well, that's exactly how exercise works, right? When I was really burned out, I was skimping on my sleep and I had a lot of emotional stress and like stress at work. And I would try to do these hard workouts early in the morning. And I was really shortchanging my results. I was like, I don't know, I feel like I'm getting like less in shape. And it was because I had so much baseline stress and I was just adding fuel to the fire, And so I talk about that in the book. Really, if you are in place of burnout and major stress, that's not the time to be doing aggressive workouts, whatever aggressive means for you. That's the time to pull back, maybe do some more nature-based walks or yoga, and then get yourself in a better place, which shouldn't take too long, and then add those back in. So the same thing, hormetic stressors are supposed to be good for you, but only if they're intermittent, and they can't be constant, and they can't have the volume turned on max because you can't add on other hormetic stressors then.
Yeah. I mean, fasting, exercise, sauna, cold water immersion.
Exactly.
Sun exposure is good for us in part because it's a sort of form of hormetic stress. And then you throw coffee into the mix, right? And then you throw psychological stress. You throw panic porn on the media. You throw just all the...
I love that panic porn.
Yeah.
Haven't heard that.
Concept. I mean, it's so true. But you throw that all into the soup and suddenly you've got burnout, and you're wondering why.
100%. That's basically what happens. And we don't ever talk about it. Like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be doing all of those things at once. Get control over your baseline stress and then start adding in hormetic stressors selectively. And I think in the biohacking world, a lot of people try to do a million things at once. And I think we talked about it offline, but taking antioxidants, it actually is bad for you because it's really, there's a very fine balance that our body needs with antioxidants in our body, and adding more is just throwing that off. So just using these tools and understanding that they're really great all on their own, but maybe not in combination, and maybe you don't need to try everything that's available to you, and being a little more selective. So what I do is I try to stay in the crossroads of scientific evidence, ancient practices, and nutritional therapies, so that it doesn't mean that I'm always bound by the literature, but at least it's science informed. And so we're trying things that are, things that we know will help us. But maybe there's not a huge randomized controlled trial about it, but we are informed about how it works. Instead of doing the million things that we could be doing, me and you are both in the wellness space, we could literally be doing 100 things a day. And some of us are. And I just feel like the more I know, the more I realize that you have to be selective with what you decide to do with your time and energy.
Couldn't agree more. What about fasting and thyroid function? Does fasting suppress the thyroid?
So same thing as exercise, right? Yes, it can if you do it in extreme amounts. But no, it won't if you are doing a simple overnight fast. And of course, people with really labile thyroid, people with really labile insulin and glucose levels, they definitely have to work with someone, because you don't want to be throwing all these hormetic stressors, even if it's a short one, without someone kind of monitoring your levels. But it's something that's very, very doable with any kind of hormonal issue. As long as that baseline hormone issue is fixed, or you're getting treated for it, so that you're not throwing in a hormonal stressor, which is a hormetic stressor, not throwing that into the mix when you're still dealing with another one.
Yeah. So you mentioned people that are prone to maybe disordered eating should definitely check with their healthcare provider, but also people that have, like type 2 diabetes,
Yeah.
things like that?
If you're on exogenous insulin or, because this could really throw off your blood sugar levels and bring them down, which is a good thing for most people. But if you're trying to figure out how much insulin you should be taking, this is something you need to work with a practitioner, someone who's pregnant, breastfeeding. A lot of women contact me because they're like, oh, I'm pregnant, 20 weeks. And I'm like, this is not the time to experiment with a fast because maybe you'll get it right, maybe you won't get it right, but you don't want to be playing around during this time. Go ahead and eat the way you normally do. And then when you are ready, then that's a time of self-experimentation. You and I both just talked about it. Like everybody has different thresholds for what stress is for them. So you might be able to run a marathon, but I won't, or I'll need 2 years of training to get there. So that's not the time to experiment. And same with children. Those are the kind of the groups that shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah. So when do you have your first meal in the day typically?
Okay. So I'm a breakfast fan. So unlike most intermittent fasters, I eat breakfast. This is delayed. And the reason why is that there's a big breakfast study that really clearly showed that the earlier your meals in the day, the better metabolic control you have. It makes sense, right? When you eat meals earlier in the day, you have better metabolic control. So the way I do it is that I start earlier in the evening. If I want to push my fast a little bit, I start a little bit earlier. I'll start at 6 or 7 instead of 8. And then I'll push it to the next day. And so I'm having my breakfast around 10 or 10:30. And so it's still a breakfast. It's just later. And, some days I'll push the envelope. If I feel good, I'll keep going. But I don't believe that you should be having your biggest meal at the end of the day. That's a cultural thing that we've built that's actually not beneficial for our bodies. If you infuse glucose into your bloodstream, and there's very good studies that show you will be able to control your blood glucose levels until about 8 o'clock. And then the same amount of glucose infusion causes blood sugar spikes all throughout the evening. And so what you're doing is if you're having a huge load of food late at night, you're basically setting yourself up for metabolic disease.
Wow. That's shocking.
Yeah,
I
right?
mean, that's crazy. And if you were going to eat a late night meal, would you say that it's then, or have a late night snack? Would you say that then the best foods to reach for are ones that are lower in?
Yes, glycemic index. Yeah. You really want to reach for the nuts or, there's something that is not going to give you that insulin dysregulation because you're just better able to handle it during the day.
I know a lot of people like some almond butter before bed or something like that.
Yeah, that's actually when I train people to fast, often because we're so used to eating all the time, it's really hard to get to bed if you haven't had something in your stomach. So one of the tricks I tell is like, if you can have a little bit of fat, even just 40 calories, that might hold you over for the night and it'll keep you in that metabolically fasting zone. I'm not talking about like thousands of calories of fat. I'm just saying a little touch of almond butter or coconut butter.
I like that.
Yeah.
And so you're like a 10 a.m., 10:30 breakfast eater. What are you eating? What's that first meal consist of for you?
So usually,
I'm getting granular here.
Yeah,
I hope you don't mind.
it.
I want to know. I want to know
like
everything
it.
about your routine.
Yeah. So in the morning, I'm usually post workout at that point, and I love my chai. And I talk about. I had no idea when I was growing up, but there's a lot of medicinal compounds that happen in Ayurveda that we have now found in all this literature to be the most anti-inflammatory foods on the planet. And so things like ginger, cardamom, cinnamon are really amazing. I mean, they could be billion-dollar drugs. So I have a chai with those spices every day. And then I usually have something with fiber and protein because I'm having it post-workout. So I time my protein to be right after the workout because that's when you can use it most efficiently. You can build lean muscle. And so I have it usually either it's a smoothie because I'm on the run or so I say there's 4 S's. A smoothie, a scramble, a salad or a soup are the 4 options that I usually reach for that have high fiber that can have protein sources, right?
The 4 S's, wait, say those again. The 4 S's of how to break your fast.
Soup, scramble, smoothie, or salad.
I love those.
Yeah, like all 4 is like you can choose that as ways to break your fast at any time of day. And don't be shy about having a non-breakfast food for breakfast. I think that was something that I had to like break this mental barrier. Like I can't be eating a salad or like I can't be having a soup at 10:30 in the morning, but it's really fine. You will survive.
You know what I broke my fast with today?
What did you figure?
A ribeye.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What time was that?
Because one day we're going to be dead, right? Yeah. So you got to enjoy life, I think.
I
had
Just don't start it with a cupcake. That's all I ask, because what ends up happening a lot when I was in training, I fasted by mistake a lot, in my medical training. And then I would come home and I'd be so hungry. And while I was trying to make the food that I was supposed to eat, I would be snacking on chips and I would have cookies and I would have all this sweet, fun foods because you're so starving. And by the time the real meal would arrive, I would already have eaten like 1,000 calories of very unhealthy stuff. And that's how a lot of people, when they accidentally fast, they'll eat a whole pizza, at the end of it. And so you can't out fast, just like you can't outrun your bad diet.
Yeah.
So people will say like, oh, I've been fasting, but I don't feel very good. Because what are you eating when you break your fast? Are you having, 10 Twinkies to break your fast? And that's why you feel awful? You can't just use that as your sole treatment. And some people a couple of doctors actually said to me, this whole fasting thing doesn't work because there's a trial that just came out in JAMA and they took obese people and they asked them to fast but not change their diet. And they saw that they were able to eat their intermittent fasting. So the intermittent fasting intervention helped them, but not significantly different than the traditional eating pattern. But as you know, with obesity and with how foods have hijacked our minds, you can literally eat 4,000 calories, even if you had a truncated amount of time, pretty easily in our culture, right? So you have to take that into account that these are obese. Like we know that there's lots of disordered eating, but definitely in certain populations. And if you take those populations and you say, well, sorry, you can't eat all day, but you can only eat for, 8 hours, they can easily eat all of that bad stuff in those 8 hours. So I do say that you can't just use it as your sole technique, but if you stick to the 4 S's, you're eating a clean diet, you are working on your baseline stress, that hormetic stressor can do wonders for you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've done some Instagram posts where I show people the calorie density of modern, whether it's ultra processed convenience foods or fast food, but you can easily get 2,000 calories in like a small, like a burger and fries, that you eat and you're still hungry.
And I used to, when I used to come home from a long day of work and I would snack in my kitchen, I started realizing how much food I was consuming because it seemed so easy to eat chips and salsa or hummus and guac and whatever. And even these seemingly kind of healthy foods like, oh, guacamole is healthy, but you're eating it with chips. And I was literally consuming my whole dinner's worth of calories in my snack that I was using as my pre-dinner snack. So that's the problem with our society. We need to reprogram our brains because we're literally hijacked by all of these pathways, the dopamine and the serotonin and the GABA, all these brain pathways that food is supposed to trigger. We're programmed, but these are volume levels on max when we're supposed to see them naturally at very low levels in nature.
And that's why diets fail all the time, right? Because people are trying to moderate their consumption of these foods, which there's just no way that you're going to be able to do that for the long term.
Absolutely. And that's why you have to change the quality of your diet. It's not necessarily that a calorie, of course, a calorie does equal a calorie when you measure it in the lab. But in our bodies, certain calories, certain foods trigger these pathways, these addiction pathways, these neurotransmitter pathways that now we're even finding in the gut. So even when your gut bacteria recognizes it in your colon, they are triggering pathways because there's serotonin made in our gut. There's all kinds of signals that we're sending to our brain. So we have to realize that some foods will falsely trigger these pathways that make us feel good, make us feel addicted, and we have to change the quality and our dependence on these foods to be able to get away from that.
Couldn't agree more. The fewer the ingredients, the better.
Yeah. And it's hard because, broccoli just isn't made to taste as intensely flavorful as a burger or as a, shake from Shake Shack or whatever. But it's because you're supposed to get these signals in you're supposed to feel full. After you eat a plate of broccoli. You're not going to feel full when you eat a plate of Doritos.
Yeah, they're minimally satiating.
Yeah.
I used to go through bags of Doritos.
Yeah, I did too. Because back in the day when I was growing up, it was like this very, very like special food. My parents would only buy it like if people were coming over. And so I would like park myself right next to the big bowl. And it was just my favorite food. I haven't had it in years. But.
Were you raised with it? Because you said that you were born in India. Were you raised with like a traditional Indian diet, or what was that like?
Yeah, when I was in India, it was super traditional. I mean, this is like they start school really early, like at age 2. I took this like horse buggy carriage to school, and there was this community that all the kids would play together, and it was very traditional. The foods were very traditional and really natural, lots of outdoor play, lots of community, lots of walking. And then when my parents moved here, of course, you're assimilating. They both worked insane hours. And my grandmother, which was like so embarrassing to me, would like drop me off at the bus stop or whatever. And then everything changed, right? Our diet changed, the lifestyle changed, the amount of community changed. And it was about a few years after that my dad was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, something that runs rampant in our family history, but it happened to him in his 30s. I mean, I was like 5 years old. And so looking back at it, I'm like, oh, it all makes sense, right? Because he came here, he wasn't moving. He was working a desk job at insane hours. He was going to business school, in off hours. We would eat Pizza Hut and Taco Bell because we wanted to feel like, American. And then it wasn't until I went into college and started to learn nutrition that I was like, oh, I get it now. I get why everybody is getting so sick, because we totally changed the way we ate. And so when I came back to it and I was like, wow, there's an anti-inflammatory index in the literature that has been validated with over 1,000 studies that ranks foods the most anti-inflammatory. And the top foods are tea, fiber, phytochemicals, and then the spices, turmeric, ginger, garlic, pepper. So if you think about it, these traditional diets, they had all the things that they needed to have all around the world, Mediterranean, Asia. But now we basically lost almost all aspects of that anti-inflammatory index.
It's insane. And you probably at the time also traded really healthful traditional fats that your ancestors used for generations, like ghee, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For corn oil.
Yeah, 100% like canola. And it's such a sad state, because now if you look at modern Indian food, it is full of trans fats and poor seed oils and hyper refined flours and sugar, because, just as we've evolved our food supply, they have too. And the tastes have changed because now there's Coke and Pepsi and there's Doritos there too. So now people want more flavorful foods, just like us. If I go back and I have my coffee order from even 10 years ago, it's like I can't even have it. It's so sweet and but at that time I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think it was too sweet at all, because we're so used to that.
These coffee drinks, some of them hundreds of calories.
My son is 13. And he's just getting to the age where he's like asking for soda or fruit drinks. And I have showed him the amount of sugar that's in one, even like healthy, real cane sugar, 36 grams, in one serving or 40 grams. I'm like, you could eat an entire brownie or more for that 40 grams. And so he's like, oh yeah, I'd rather eat a brownie then,
Yeah. At least a brownie has like some degree of like a satiety inducing effect.
Yeah.
Whereas like these drinks, like they just don't.
They don't even feel like you're eating a dessert. You just feel like, oh, this is just normal. And so teaching them really young about the things that we never learned about is super important to me, to say, hey guys, I literally tell them, I'm like, your brain has been hijacked by these companies and you have to unlearn that. You have to remember that in nature, you're supposed to detect sweet and, salty and savory, but the signals have been turned out so high that now you have to turn it down again. And you got to remember that there's no way you're going to like real food if you are chronically eating this hyper processed food.
Yeah. I made a post recently on social media. What is a chronotype?
So it's interesting because people actually have not heard the term chronotype before, but most people really understand the concept. So if you've ever been called an early bird or a night owl before, has that ever come across your wavelengths before?
Yeah, I've never been called an early bird.
Okay. So now that we have that part clear, right? So here's the thing: is those are chronotypes, and so when you start to look at the medical literature about when we started to discover these things, scientifically, it was kind of in the 70s where people started with this idea of a questionnaire for morningness and eveningness. But to be clear, chronotypes have been around since like the dawn of time. So if you think about early villages, well, what was going on there? Well, there was a certain group of people that went out and hunted. Guess what? They were the early birds.
Wow.
Right? And then there's a certain group of people that stayed around the village, tended to the village, that kind of thing. They were what we call hummingbirds. And then there were people who was security or the sentries. Guess what? They were the night owls, right? So this isn't really a new concept. My contribution to the literature is, number one, we now understand that this is genetic. So you can send me your 23andMe data or your Ancestry.com data, and I can actually show you on your genome exactly where the polymorphism is that creates this idea of being an early bird or a night owl. But what was also interesting was what I added was that there's an insomnia. There's a version of insomnia that seems to fall into this. And so I actually added a fourth chronotype. Now, to be fair, I didn't like them being named after birds. I'm a mammal. I'm not a bird. And so I was like, all right, let's figure out some animals types that we can use. Now, you'll appreciate this. Having recently released a book. In the marketing of the book, right, we were all sitting around trying to think of, well, what are these animals going to be, right? Well, we discovered very early on, nobody wants to be a porcupine, right? So we had to choose animals that were aspirational animals. But my biggest requirement was that, in fact, they had to maintain the circadian cycle that we were talking about. So an early bird, what we discovered was lions are early birds, right? Their first kill is before dawn. Historically, people know that wolves are night creatures, right? They hunt in the late evenings in the night. So lion for the early bird, wolf for the night owl became pretty obvious. And then in the middle were bears, right? Made sense, right? Bears kind of rise with the sun, go to sleep, as the moon comes out. But then it was, what do we do with these problem children, right? These insomnia kind of creatures. And so I chose dolphins. And so the reason I chose dolphins was because dolphins sleep unihemispherically. So half of their brain is asleep while the other half is awake and looking for predators, right? Because, they're swimming in the water at the same time. And I thought that was kind of a unique representation of people who are never quite asleep. Right. And so what's really been fascinating is it's not just that these genetic traits make you wake up earlier or fall asleep earlier or later, or as the case may be, but it's a roadmap for your entire hormonal set. Right. So that's where it gets kind of bizarre. So with somebody who's an earlier person, what I call a lion, their melatonin basically turns off at like 5 a.m. Right. But for somebody who's a wolf, a night owl like me, my melatonin doesn't want to turn off generally until like 8.
Wow. So
all of a sudden, somebody asking a night person to wake up at 6 becomes a really difficult thing to do. Right. And so then you start to say, well, what other hormones follow this circadian rhythmicity? All of them
Wow.
do. So it's all very predictable, but it's going to be forwards or backwards depending upon this one area of early bird, night owl in the middle, or insomniac. So all of a sudden the literature started to come together really quickly. And so we said, all right, well, we've kind of figured out the when to go to bed and when to wake up thing. What else could we figure out? Because people are always asking me, like, is there a perfect time of day to do certain things? Because if you get figured out sleep, what else could there be? And so I'm like, well, if we looked at hormones and we said, what hormones do you need for certain activities? If we know naturally when they're going to be at those times, because if we know their chronotype, then that would be the best time of day for them to do these activities. Dude, the science was ridiculous. We have over 220 studies in the book. I can tell you the best time of day to have sex, eat a cheeseburger, ask your boss for a raise. Like, it's unbelievable. So, because what we did was, I have a bunch of my buddies. So I called them all up and I'm like, you guys aren't going to believe this. Tell me every activity that you do during the day. So I had them all, writing down every activity for like 2 weeks. And we had this culmination. We had almost 100 activities. We chose 50 that we thought most people would be interested in. That's what's in the book. So the book is, you can take a quiz, you can take it online, it's chronoquiz.com, and you get your chronotype. And then from there, you can start to learn a whole host of different activities, when to drink coffee, when to exercise, that kind of thing.
And it varies from person to person.
Yeah, it does.
It's amazing.
Yeah, there's really 4 big types. And one of the things that we've learned, we've had over like 1.4 million people now have taken the quiz. So we've had a decent number of folks roll through the metrics of it. And what we've also discovered is there's one chronotype called a bear. That's kind of the people in the middle, what we used to call the hummingbirds. They actually bifurcate. So there are early bears and there are late bears is what we've kind of discovered.
Wow.
But like, it's always interesting to me when you start to think about like self-help, and when I'm trying to work on myself, I'm trying to set these goals, do these certain things in my life. If I knew what the perfect time of my 24-hour cycle was to try to accomplish those tasks, I would have a leg up on that, right?
Yeah.
Like, that would be like, I'm accelerating that process.
Yeah, so true. And so so you talked about melatonin. What are some of the other hormones that are differentially modulated by these different chronotypes?
Cortisol, like the biggie in all anti-inflammatory, discussions, interleukin 6. I mean, like, dude, literally every single hormone is altered in terms of when it is produced based on these chronotypes.
Talk about cortisol, because a lot of people think about cortisol sort of as being this like blanket negative hormone because of its association with chronic stress.
Right.
But cortisol is not bad, right?
God, no. Cortisol's awesome, dude. If we didn't have cortisol, we wouldn't be able to wake up, right? So in order to pull a body and a brain out of a state of unconsciousness, you need 2 hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. And they have to be pretty much up there because remember, REM sleep has a tendency to occur in the latter part of the night. That's where the bulk of your REM sleep is. You have a little bit in each cycle, but the back half is where you get the most of it. That's really arguably one of the deepest stages of sleep. In order to pull the brain out of that for, wake up for your day, when it is the most likely stage you're going to be in, you need something that's got some giddy up in it. And cortisol and adrenaline are those things. So cortisol is very helpful. Cortisol is also helpful for any time that you need significant movement in a short, in a rapid pace, right? So if you're running or fear, all of those things. Trust me, if you didn't have cortisol, we'd all be dead.
Yeah, we'd all be in big trouble. So is this why people when people have to attenuate their sleep for whatever reason, they wake up due to an alarm clock to get to work, they feel miserable because they've cut off that latter part of the sleep?
Absolutely, because again, their cycle is going to be based on their chronotype. And so it becomes more and more difficult for people. Like you've heard this whole idea of the 5 a.m. club, right? Like people are like, you're going to wake up at, Richard Branson gets up at 5 a.m. Like, that's awesome for him. But I'm here to tell you, genetically speaking, not preference, just pure genetics here, you're talking maybe 25 to 30% of the population could do that successfully. Literally 70% of people who are trying to do that are not going to be successful because the genetics aren't with them on it, right? Like, if you're a night owl like me and you try to do that kind of shit, are you kidding me? Like, you're miserable. Like, it affects your whole idea behind self-help, right? Changes. That's not good. Yeah. We want, like, my idea is, let's have more self-help. Let's have more self-care. Let's have people really thinking about what they do.
So, okay, REM sleep is sort of like is REM, like, would you consider that a deep phase of sleep? Because isn't there significant arousal actually when we're in REM?
So here's what's interesting is there's significant brain activity during REM, but not necessarily arousal. So when we look at the stages of sleep, what we're now starting to understand is the stages themselves have very particular functions for us during our waking state. So REM sleep, it appears as though has the biggest function is moving information from our short-term memory to our long-term memory. So that electrical process, right? Because it's just data that it's moving, right? So data comes in through your eyes, ears, nose, whatever. During stage 3, 4 sleep, you filter, this is the shit I want to keep. This is what I want to get rid of. So when the keep stuff, when you hit REM sleep, it grabs that and it then puts it into into your hard drive, right? So the process of doing that is all electrical or electroneurochemical. And that whole process, as that's occurring, your brain has to figure out, well, what does that mean? Because there's all this kind of electricity floating around. So it interprets it in kind of a fantastical way, which are your dreams, right? And so there's a tremendous amount of brain activity, but yet when you look at depth of sleep, I would argue that REM is probably one of the deepest stages of sleep, but yet arousals, not necessarily, but activity, you bet, right? Whereas stage 3, 4 sleep, that's all your physical restoration, right? So, and that's really front loaded. So that's actually in the beginning of the night, which kind of makes sense from a mother nature standpoint, right? Because if a saber-toothed tiger was coming into your cave where you're sleeping after 3 hours, you want your body to have been physically restored enough to get the heck out of there, right? So I get why that part seems to be going on.
Probably because it's like it's more oriented to survival. Like,
right.
you got to take care of the body before you take care of the brain.
Exactly
even though
what I'm saying.
Yeah. Super interesting.
Yeah. So when we lay sleep out and we start to really understand what happens when you don't get certain stages, and then when you get more of other stages, it can actually be very enlightening.
Wow. Is that in the beginning part of the night when you first go to sleep? Isn't that when you first get those really important hormonal pulses like testosterone?
Growth hormone is the biggest, and that's the hallmark of stage 3, 4 sleep, right? And so when growth hormone hits, growth hormone, it's like the holy grail of anti-aging. It's like what everybody wants because growth hormone fixes it. Right, it's true cellular repair occurs when growth hormone is emitted, and it's only emitted in large boluses during stage 3, 4 sleep. So here's what's always so fascinating to me is people are always saying, I want to get less sleep. I want to get less sleep. Okay, I'm okay with that, but what you really want is you want to think not about the quantity of sleep. You want to think about sleep quality. Right. And if you can improve your sleep quality, which I would argue there are definitely ways that you can do that because that's what I do. I'm a high performance sleep coach. Right. So I no longer treat like apnea and narcolepsy. Like I take people who are of, high net wealth and celebrity types and they say, Michael, I want to perform at my highest level and I only want to get 6 hours of sleep. Like that's what we do.
Jeez, 6 hours. And so what do you say when your clients say something like that?
It's possible.
Interesting. With 6 hours.
Absolutely.
Wow. But does it depend on the person or is that something you can like train your body to?
A little bit of both, right? So here's one of the things that's so fascinating, getting back to the book, is let's say you and I start working together. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out what your chronotype is. And then I'm going to change your bedtime and I'm going to make it the chronotypical bedtime. Guess what happens? When you do that for 21 days, your time starts to shrink because your brain has now recognized, oh, this dumb body of mine is actually doing what I need it to do. Wow. So it can reliably predict when to start melatonin, when to turn it off. That makes the entire system more efficient. As the system becomes more, because part of the reason why you have stage 2 sleep is because your circadian rhythm for REM is spread out a little bit further back than your circadian rhythm for deep. So if you can get out some of the middle, it makes sense. I'm not suggesting that you eliminate it. I'm suggesting that when you sleep during what is your chronotypical bedtime, naturally it just shrinks because that's what it did for me.
Wow.
I sleep 6 hours and 13 minutes and I'm the freaking sleep doctor, right? How do I do that? My consistency in my bedtime. I go to bed at midnight every single night. I'm a night owl. That's my time. It works perfect for me. I used to sleep until 7:30 every morning without an alarm. I literally wake up at 6:13 every single day.
Wow, that's super interesting.
And it just creeps back. It just gives me more morning.
Would you say that going to bed at a consistent time is one of the keys to optimizing sleep quality?
It's the anchor.
Wow.
It is if you want to learn one thing from me, it's wake up time. keeping that consistent will actually change just about everything. The whole system really needs the solidity of that anchor in order for it to have something to latch onto, so then everything else just kind of knows when to go.
Wow. So walk me through the different phases. So we've talked about stage 3 and 4.
Right.
But is that slow wave sleep?
That is. So that's considered slow wave or deep sleep. So the only thing that's left to talk about really is stage 1 and stage 2. And to be fair, stage 1 is a transitional stage. It makes up maybe 2%. So it's really not that big of a deal. Stage 2 is where we actually can make some headway. So with stage 2, what we know is that there is some things that have to do with memorial function in there. There's some things that have to do with overall levels of energy in there. But to be truthful, it can compact upon itself. And so when I work with clients that you tell me, oh, I have to get, 8.5, 9 hours just to feel, like I can function. Once we get them sleeping during their chronotypical bedtimes, that begins to shrink. And when we're monitoring their sleep, because I monitor their sleep during the whole process, what we see happens to be shrinking is stage 2.
Wow.
And that's natural. Like we're not adding anything to make that happen.
Are there ways so I have a question, but before I get to that question, I want to know your thoughts, and I could share my take on them. But what do you feel about sleep tracking devices?
So I have one on right now.
Okay, is that the Aura?
It is. It's the Aura Ring.
Nice.
So here's what I can tell you about sleep tracking devices. Sleep is a difficult metric, right? And so steps were easy. Right? My daughter, who's 16, that's a calculus problem, right? Just your gait, the length of your leg, your swing, and you've figured out how many steps you need to take in a day. Sleep is very, very complicated, because if I say to you, how did you sleep last night, on a scale of 1 to what? Is it 10? Is it 100? Who the hell knows? And then what do you measure becomes the biggest question. How quickly you fell asleep, how much deep sleep did you get, how much REM sleep, how many awakenings, how long were the awakenings? You get the point. So unfortunately, most of the companies that have developed sleep monitoring systems weren't sleep companies. They were tracking companies. So there really wasn't a tremendous amount of forethought put into how do you create or understand this metric from a sleep clinician standpoint. So we're finally starting to see some of that happening. Full disclosure, I like the Aura Ring quite a bit. I use it with my patients for 2 or 3 simple reasons. One is the form factor. They stick it on, they don't think about it. They have to charge it once every 3 days. It's easy. When I was using, for example, the Apple Watch, you have to take it off and you have to charge. It's a pain in the butt. So from a convenience standpoint, I like that. Collecting data from the finger actually has some significant advantages, because you can get temperature. You can also get heart rate variability. And so we all know heart rate variability has turned out to be a really interesting metric for a lot of reasons from overall health standpoints. So you can get sleep, you can get heart rate variability. There's some good stuff in here. But to be fair, it's not 100% accurate. It's not even close, right? First of all, remember, there's night-to-night variability in sleep. Even if I put you in a sleep lab every single night for 30 days, 85% of the time your days would make sense. But 15% of the time your days would be wildly different, And so it's just, that's how sleep works, is it's not this easy thing to necessarily categorize. So I would argue that this is kind of the best of the worst in some cases. All of them are reasonable, but believe it or not, now there's this new thing called orthosomnia. So there are people who are getting so tweaked out by their results from these things that they can't sleep.
Wow. It's almost like orthorexia.
Right.
But it's like the sleep anxiety version.
Exactly.
Wow. That's super interesting.
People are crazy.
So the reason why I ask about that is because a lot of people have asked me just over the years how to boost. They've seen on their sleep tracker that they're not getting enough REM sleep, or they're not getting enough slow wave sleep. So how much stock would you put into?
Yes. How do you read the disparate data is the real question here, right?
Well, how do you read it, and then also, is there any meaningful way to to micromanage, the amount of time that you spend in REM versus slow wave?
Yeah. If you're Michael Bruce and you know how to do that, absolutely.
Wow.
But to be really super honest with you, that's one of the biggest problems with the tracking industry. Nobody knows what to do with the data. First of all, the accuracy is a problem. And then the secondary function is, well, what does it mean? Right? Okay, I get 13 minutes of REM sleep every night. Is that good? Is it bad? Here's what I'm going to tell everybody out there that's tracking anything is, don't look at the absolute data, look at the relative data. So if one night it says 13 minutes, don't go into a panic. If it says that 13 minutes every night, guess what? You're fine, right? Because at the end of the day, there's no way you're only getting 13 minutes of sleep, but it's consistently being inaccurate. It's when you have 13 minutes one night and 407 minutes the next and 38 the next. That's when you want to kind of start to understand what's going on. So I'm always looking at relative data, and you take averages, right? You never look at just one point of data. I know lots of people, they wake up in the morning, they check their score. Bad idea. Okay, check your score on Sundays if that's what if you're really dying to know, right? Trust me, you'll be okay with it. The other reason for me that I like the Oura Ring, the third one, is they have an open API built in for my patients, and so I can actually monitor my people, from far away if I need to. So I can actually give them on the fly sleep data.
Wow.
If they need it.
That's amazing. So then how would you say, somebody out there is wanting to improve or lengthen the amount of time spent in slow wave sleep? Slow wave sleep, we know, and I'm sure you can speak to this very well about, it's when the glymphatic system.
Yeah, it pulls all that other crap out of there. We want that. We're dying for it's like the waste management of the brain finally comes in and pulls all that crap out, right?
Amazing.
Yeah. So how do we improve that, right? And that whole kind of idea. So easiest way to improve slow wave sleep is exercise. The most positive way is daily cardiovascular exercise. So one of the things that's been going on during this whole quarantine insanity is people aren't moving. I had a celebrity the other day, they texted and they were like, I've had 200 steps and it's 2:00. I'm like, oh my God, like you'd be at like 8,000 by 2:00, on a normal day. So like people aren't moving. And so that remember, sleep is all about recovery. And so the reason we need recovery is because we have moved. So you need to move in order to sleep better. So you need to get that back into your whole, regimen. And that's one of the easiest ways to improve sleep quality. The other is the elimination of caffeine and alcohol, right? I mean, not a big surprise there. To be fair, I like both of them. So managing those and mitigating that risk in a unique way can actually be very effective, right? So none of my clients turn to me and say, oh, I never want to have alcohol again, or I never want to have caffeine again. So what we've come up with is a set of rules, which I'm happy to share. So the first one we know is that based on your circadian rhythm, and this is going to differ based on whatever your chronotype is, 90 minutes after you're supposed to wake up based on your chronotype, that's when you should have your caffeine. The reasoning is because cortisol and adrenaline have boosted you up to wake you up in the morning. And so when you have those two things functioning in your brain, adding caffeine does almost no good, because it's cortisol and adrenaline are like cocaine compared to, like caffeine, which is like weak tea, right? In terms of just how powerful they are towards the brain. You got to let that simmer down before you add the caffeine on it. Otherwise, it's just not going to do you a whole lot of good.
Is there any harm that can come from like pouring caffeine into that milieu?
So not any harm per se, but what ends up happening is people are like, well, nothing worked.
Wow.
And so then they add another shot, and then they add, and then they're getting their 4-shot espresso or their 6-shot or whatever. If they literally just waited, then they'd get all the boost that they're looking for. And then what ends up happening sometimes is if they exacerbate the caffeine is they get all the, the bad side effects. So they get the jitters or things like that.
I feel like, so you're saying wait 90 minutes after you wake up?
90 minutes after you open your eyes. If you're waking up on your chronotypical wake up time,
got it.
That's when it works. That's the magic number. And then caffeine has a half-life of between 6 and 8 hours. So most people don't think about it that way, but it does. And so my guesstimate is around 2:00 in the afternoon is a good cutoff time, right? Because then most people, at least here in North America, go to bed somewhere around 10, 11. So 8 hours later, half of it's out of your system. It shouldn't prevent you from sleeping. Now, I guarantee you there's people who are listening and they're going to be like, sleep doctor, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I can have a cup of coffee, a dinner, or espresso, cappuccino, and I can go right to bed. So let's be clear, there are different caffeine sensitivities. That's something that we learned probably about 8 or 9 years ago now, is different people react differently to caffeine. But I'm going to tell you something. I dare you to do this, because here's what's going to happen is you might be able to fall asleep, but the quality of the sleep you're getting is going to be pure crap, right? If I stuck electrodes on your head right after you had a cup of coffee and had you go to sleep, caffeine's a stimulant. It doesn't matter how you slice it. That's how it acts in the brain. So the closer to bedtime that you drink caffeine, the worse your slow wave sleep is, right? Because you're moving too fast to be slow, right? Is the easiest way to think about it. Caffeine's a stimulant. Slow wave sleep, it's called slow wave for a reason. The waves are slow.
So like drinking caffeine too late in the day could actually, you're saying theoretically, impair how well your brain is able to clean itself of these plaques that accumulate?
Oh, I don't think there's any theoretical about it. I would say absolutely that's true.
Wow.
I would say that's the case.
Wow. Yeah, that's frightening.
Depending upon the amount of caffeine, of course, and your tolerance level and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And I mean, your internal microbiome is obviously going to have something to do with it. But I think there's absolutely, I don't think there's any question about whether or not there's an influence. I think the question would be if it's the sole influence or not.
Yeah.
I would argue probably not.
Wow, super interesting. So it's funny because when I wake up, I love to just go to the kitchen. I drink a glass of water.
Good. You should.
And I then go right for the coffee. like
well, at least you're drinking the water. You know, why do you feel like you just want to have something to help you open up?
In terms of the caffeine, well, here's the thing. I routinely take breaks from caffeine. I think it's important to not be dependent on it.
For sure.
But when I am drinking caffeine, I tend to drink it, maybe like 20 minutes, just to be generous, 20, 30 minutes after I wake up. Definitely not 90 minutes. But I think probably I do that more for just the ritual of it. Like, just like you wake up, you go downstairs. It's the best part of waking up, right?
Right. It's Folgers in your cup.
Yeah.
So my morning ritual, so I had a similar ritual that you did. I mean, I think a lot of us do, right? We're kind of used to that whole idea. So let me give you the science, right? I already told you the science on caffeine. Now I'm going to tell you the science on the cheapest way to wake up. It's called sunlight. Right. And so here's the deal is when the sun hits your eye, there's a special cell in your eye called a melanopsin cell. When the blue light from the sun hits your eye, it turns that shit off. It turns off the melatonin. You wake up. So what I'd rather see people do is grab that water, because that's absolutely what you want to do. Most people don't know sleep is a dehydrative event. You lose almost a full liter of water from the humidity in your breath.
Wow.
From sleeping all night long. So you're dehydrated when you wake up, which is another reason you shouldn't have caffeine, because caffeine's a diuretic, so you already have a dehydrated system. You're going to add a diuretic to that. That's not a smart idea. I'd rather see you hydrate, get some sunlight, breathe some fresh air. I promise you do that, 7 to 15 mornings in a row, you will feel significantly better. And you probably won't even want that caffeine. If you just wait that 90 minutes, you'll be surprised at how much more you'll enjoy it.
Wow. Why is it that some people, I was talking to my little brother about this, and he shared this anecdote that, when he sleeps a good 8 hours, he feels great. When he undersleeps, he feels like crap if he has to wake up unnaturally early. But counterintuitively, he also feels like crap if he sleeps too much.
Right. So it's fascinating. So there's a lot of interesting things that have been done with sleep deprivation over the years and trying to understand that whole idea. So we used to think of it as we called it the sleep debt, right? So you had a bank, you pulled out 8 hours, and whatever you put back and whatever's left was your debt, right? Well, so now that idea doesn't work so great because we don't always pull out 8 hours, nor should we, right? So during different stages of our life, during different medical situations, if we're on certain medications, stress, blah, 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 we're going to have different amounts. So it's really hard to kind of metric it that way. But when we start to think about amounts of sleep, the consistency thing, I know I'm beating this horse to death, but I'm promise you guys this. I've never seen anything work as well as consistent wake up time, because what it does is it just channels everything into it, and you can't oversleep, right? So, you're saying your brother was saying to you, well, I feel like crap if I sleep too much. My body doesn't let me do it. Like I'm up, and it drives me a little crazy to be really honest with you, because I'm always like, if I open my eyes, it's going to be somewhere between 6:09 and 6:23. It's always right on like 6:13, 6:14. It's spooky, right? And it drives me crazy, but it's like, that's my brain's time. And it's really helpful because guess what? I'm the only one up in the house. I can do whatever I want. I can read, I can meditate, I can go outside and breathe. I can catch up on like the football scores from the night before. I can read about whatever I want to read about. It's perfect for me. You'd be surprised that you capture these times that can be pretty valuable. Undersleeping, we all know a lot about undersleeping in terms of creating sleep deprivation. The big question is acute versus sustained, right? So acute is, do I pull an all-nighter? Sustained is, I've been losing like 90 minutes of sleep every night for the last 12 years. Michael, what do I do, right? So our bodies will absorb a decent amount of that. Again, if I can get you into your chronotypical sleep schedule, your body just knows what to do there. And it's literally like it's like a superpower. It's like you can plug into this like energy and all of a sudden it just clicks in and makes everything work better. So, I mean, that's really always the goal and part of the reason it feels worse when you don't sleep enough is because you're not in your chronotypical schedule. And then when you sleep too much again, you're not in your schedule.
Wow. It's so great to hear you talk about these chronotypes because I've always felt somewhat guilty about being a night owl and not loving waking up at 5 a.m, like some of my more productive friends.
Dude, you, me, and Dave Asprey, right? So Dave says this to me all the time. He's like, thank God you started telling people about wolves, Michael, because he's one. What's fascinating? Most of my artists, most of my real creators are night owls, right? So artists, actors, authors, lots and lots of these people. I mean, we're night creatures, like that's when my ideas come. That's when I'm the most creative. That's when I'm the most thoughtful. And that's okay as long as you know it.
Yeah.
Then you can work with it.
Super interesting. So what about ways of boosting REM sleep?
So boosting REM sleep has number one, sleep in your chronotypical bedtime, because it'll naturally allow that to occur. Number two is it actually has a lot to do with doing things to maintain a solid sleep schedule. So trying to avoid things that could be waking you up throughout the night. So things like having to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, or things like having too much caffeine on board. Caffeine just pretty much destroys all of it.
Wow.
Cannabis can definitely have an effect on REM sleep. And so for folks out there who are daily users of cannabis or evening users of cannabis, one of the things we know is continuous use of high levels of THC will definitely start to bring REM sleep down. Now, here's the interesting argument, because people are always saying things to me like, well, how can you support the idea of cannabis for sleep, Dr. Bruce, if it lowers REM sleep? And so here's my response to that. Every single SSRI, Prozac, Zoloft, Effixor, Abilify, every single one of them almost completely knocks out REM sleep. Almost completely. People have been on those drugs for 30 years, right? Without any appreciable REM sleep. A little bit of cannabis, it doesn't knock it out. All it does is it lowers it down. And I would argue that when you start to look at it and there are different isomers of THC, there's definitely a way to figure out how to get THC that doesn't, have a tremendous effect on REM sleep. And to be fair, the thing you're really looking for is CBN. CBN is the constituent within cannabis that actually has the most data surrounding positivity for sleep.
Back just quickly to sleep, because we talked about that and how important that is. And one of the most common questions that I get asked are from moms and dads, but I mean primarily moms that hear all the time how important sleep is, right? Yeah. But they have like kids, like newborns sometimes, that just like prevent them. And I think you're the first sleep expert that I've had on my podcast who is a female, and also you have a kid. And so, how did you, like, knowing everything that you know about sleep, how did you balance those obligations?
Woman, mom, doctor, sleep expert. Yeah. So, well, I think that it is like a little bit of not a pet peeve, but I have an interesting reaction when I see people lecture me about sleep, and I look at their lives, and it kind of reminds me of like a yoga enunciate who like gets to go live on a mountaintop and meditate all day. It's like, yeah, you could perfectly optimize your life because nobody depends on you, and it's like you do your 18-hour a day like intermittent fasting and perfect balance of high intensity interval training and weightlifting, and like you've got it, you're nailing it. Keto, you do it. But like introduce the householders, like the real world pulls on our attention and our time. And to me, that's where it gets fun, because I would much prefer trying to optimize within constraints than just like get carried away with optimization when there is no constraint. I think it gets kind of crazy. So one thing is that newborns are, that's temporary. And so it really is bad, and it really is built into the system. Like I do feel like you have a bit of a hormonal change to your brain, so you can tolerate some amount of sleep deprivation better than you would if you were at a different phase of your life, if you didn't have those hormones supporting it. That is not to say it like feels good, or like every time that cry wakes you up at 3 a.m, you're like, God damn it, I love you, but God damn it, you're so cute. Good thing they're cute. But the thing is that, so that's temporary. And then I think it is worth really focusing on how do you get this kid to sleep, and how do you get yourself to get adequate sleep. And those things work in tandem a bit. I think a lot of the same strategies work for both. For my daughter, so sleep training is controversial. That's a controversy. There's like attachment parenting that, says maybe you're up and doing feeding on demand and all of that all through the night. Maybe you're co-sleeping. Sleep training is like you put the kid in, and through some various approaches to it, you train the kid to self-soothe and put themselves back to sleep. So I'll admit, and it's controversial, but we did end up sleep training our daughter. And so that was a game changer. And we started sleeping, like it really sleep trained us. And so we all started sleeping in the household after we did that. But also we're very conscious about her exposure to blue spectrum light after sunset and her blood sugar overnight. And to me, like those were the most effective troubleshootings around her sleep. It's always so physiologic. Like we think that these dramas of human health are, like some big insurmountable problem, but you just go back to the fundamentals of physiology. Like, is this kid hungry? Is their blood sugar crashing? Are they reacting to light? Are they dehydrated? Do they have a fever? You kind of go through those things. Do they need to poop? And so we keep my daughter's blood sugar really stable overnight through feeding in a pretty particular way. And then she doesn't really get to see light. Like it's pretty Game of Thrones in our apartment after sunset, and it works. And then we apply those same metrics to ourselves. And the thing I've always struggled with is sleep procrastination. So even since becoming a parent, I will, like we all do it, right? It's like one last thing. I have to finish this thing for work. I want a minute to myself. I want to watch one more show, whatever it is. And it was only recently that I finally figured out how to stop sleep procrastinating, because I knew I should be in bed like 10:30, but instead I was getting in bed 11:15, 11:45, which is better than college days where I was like the 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. sleeper. But I basically started to realize that last half an hour of so-called productivity or so-called me time was squandering my entire next day, because then I was just feeling half awake and grumpy and irritable and not functioning my best and not doing right by my patients the next day. So I really finally that's what motivates me now. And I think for parents to actually realistically get good quality sleep, we do have to work on our own sleep procrastination. And it's that much harder when you're parents because you have no time to yourself. But to shut down the phone, the Instagram, the computer, whatever it is, even doing the dishes, even life logistics, shut it down so you can get in bed at the right time will make the whole next day feel better, and it all just goes more smoothly.
Wow, such good advice. Sometimes when I am watching TV too late into the evening, and, I'll admit my brother, whose house I do all the binge watching at, he's sort of got like the Lugavere hub in LA. Like we all go to his house. He's got this huge TV. It's like 80 something inches and it's just massive. And so whenever it's like a daytime scene on that TV, it's like, boom, your brain thinks it's like daytime as well because it's such a big TV. And sometimes the next day will feel hungover from that. I have like literally a light hangover the next day. Yeah, the balance of cortisol and melatonin is really the key to sleep. And there's no this isn't rocket science. It was a good design. There was a board meeting of evolution where they're like, how should we make humans feel awake and tired? And someone was like, I don't know, should we use light? That seems like a pretty foolproof system. Like then during the day it'll be light and they'll be awake, and then at night it'll be dark and they'll be tired, and everyone was like, good idea, Genius. I respect that. And then it got totally jacked up with the advent of electricity, which I wouldn't take back. Like, this has been pretty rad, right. But we just now have to outsmart it because it's jacked up all of our sleep circadian rhythms. So in a way, you just have to understand that light basically suppresses our melatonin. Melatonin is this hormone that makes us feel tired, but it also gives us good quality sleep, deep sleep. It helps our immune system attack colds, and it helps us fight cancers that's growing in our body. And so you really want to protect melatonin. It's kind of an endangered species of modern life. Like, it's this shy little crab that retreats into its cave with any sign of light. And so, and then when you're suppressing melatonin with light, you're also increasing cortisol, our stress hormone. And so you want to use light strategically, which is both to open up the blinds, get outside. Maybe you don't wear sunglasses during the day. You make sure that you actually give that signal to your brain. This is daytime. Feel energetic. But then after sunset, the more you can Game of Thronesify your life, and by that I mean like candles and not artificial light, and not an 80-inch
TV with a daytime scene, that is going to send a light signal through your eyes to the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the brain that says, good morning, it's 8 a.m., the sun is rising. And it's not. And so then your brain's like, really? Okay. Suppress melatonin, secrete cortisol. And this is kind of just it. Like, I have patients who they just correct for this in their life, and their insomnia is a thing of the past. And there was an interesting, in New York, we had Hurricane Sandy years ago, which was a devastating hurricane, a lot of problems. But one thing I noticed is that for people who lived so-called SOPO, south of power, where there was no electricity, I still went to work that day. And patients showed up and they're like, I've never slept better than I am without electricity. Partly they were bored, but partly it was, truly in New York City, a place with ambient light that basically looks like daytime. There was no light pollution. There was no electronic devices. We were all getting the real signal of darkness after sunset.
Yeah. Do you keep your bedroom like totally pitch black?
So blackout shades are this thing that I always thought was for grownups. Like, that seemed like way too much of an ordeal to do. And then when I finally did it, it's actually less expensive and less of an ordeal than I ever thought. So I really strongly recommend it. It's better than even just the eye mask, like getting a blackout shade. Our bedroom is like walk off a cliff dark at night. And cold and all the things and white noise. We do it all.
You do it all.
Yeah.
I like when you were talking about melatonin that you mentioned that melatonin, because there's a nuance that sometimes gets lost in the conversation about melatonin and sleep, that melatonin has all these side hustles. It's an important antioxidant. It helps fight cancer. And so that basically means that at the latter end of the day, that light is almost, bright light in particular, is almost like a toxin because it can suppress one of the most powerful chemoprotective antioxidants that your own body makes.
I think that's a really true and bold statement. It's basically light after sunset is carcinogenic.
Wow.
Yeah. So effectively, there's the, what's that nurses' health study, like the study of so many tens of thousands of women in Boston a while back. And they looked at a lot of different metrics, a lot of outcomes. But they did notice that women that worked overnight shifts, the nurses that worked overnight shifts, which kind of by definition meant they had this suppression of melatonin because they were in daylight conditions at night, they had higher rates of breast cancer. So that's a little, and I think we have some other evidence to back this up at this point. But so basically, when you don't get your melatonin at night, you're not taking care of those nascent cancers around the body. Your immune system, it basically is turned on with melatonin. That's why everyone's like, hey, I was sick last night, but now I feel better. And then at sunset, and they're like, I kind of feel sick again. We all go through that. And we don't realize it's because your immune system will dial up with melatonin and actually do the work it needs to do. And that's also a good design because you want to be less sick feeling during the day so you can function. And then at night, you kind of want to go retreat and fight off the illnesses. Yeah.
I mean, God, sleep is so amazing. Melatonin also, it is involved, it activates brown fat. It was recently revealed in the literature. It's a gatekeeper in the process known as autophagy, which is, when your cells clean house. It's sort of like the Kondo method for your cells. The KonMari method.
Yep. The garbage truck's going through the streets of your brain, being like, oh, look at all this trash. Get it out of here.
I know.
There's one other thing on cortisol worth bringing up, which is that this concept of overtired, which I never understood until I had a kid. I never had heard that word. And then when I heard that word in the context of having a kid, I was like, that can't possibly be a thing, overtired. You just get tired and then more tired. But what you learn when you have a kid is that they have tired signs. They'll yawn. They'll rub their eyes. They'll kind of like show you that they're sleepy. And it looks so cute and so sweet. It's actually a total emergency. And when you see a kid that's tired, you have to change their diaper and swaddle them and put like this pile of dynamites in the crib and then exit yourself from the situation. Because if you miss that sweet spot when they're perfectly tired, then they're going to get overtired, which is a secretion of cortisol. And you start to, like for a kid, they're crying inconsolably. They're arching their back. They're emanating heat. And of course, it happens to adults too. So we start to recognize our tired signs, and then you can recognize your overtired signs too.
Is that why when you delay sleep, you get like almost like a second wind?
Exactly. It's the second wind. It's the tired but wired. It's the I was falling asleep on the couch 1 minute, and now I'm doing projects, and now I'm tossing and turning, trying to fall asleep.
Yeah. And all of a sudden you can't sleep. When you were just falling asleep on the couch, like 10 to 20 minutes ago?
Because you have cortisol coursing through your veins at this point. Because basically, and I think this is a good design too, I love the ancestral mentality, like to make sense of why do our bodies respond in certain ways to certain situations. And I think that basically, if you didn't go to bed when you were tired, you probably had a good reason for that. Like tonight's the war or the Great Migration. There's something, you're on night shift duty, whatever it is. So your body, like this eager, zealous employee that it is like, I will help you stay awake all night. I will secrete cortisol. I'll suppress melatonin. Let's do this. And that's fine when it's the Great Migration. And it just doesn't work in our modern life where we're basically artificially awake in the evening because we have addictive devices that make us want to stay up just a little bit later. And then we end up overtired every night.
Wow. We've covered so much. I mean, we've covered lifestyle and dietary modifications to fight depression. We talked about anxiety, limiting caffeine, keeping your blood sugar stable. Is there anything else you want to add? Because we're almost out of time, but man, I feel like I could keep talking to you for hours.
So, well, let's see. One thing we need to talk about is community. And I called melatonin the endangered species of modern life, but I actually think it's community. Wow. And that's the secret sauce to who is actually healthy and happy and maintains brain function late into life and people who are fulfilled. And it's kind of like it is about our social connections, full stop. And I think that that's something people have to work really hard at and practically at in modern life, because modern life just creates all of this isolation into our silos and our McMansions and our SUVs, and we're not getting out and connecting. And this one's easier said than done. Like, I love to solve problems with health, and it's easier to say, hey, take a spoonful of almond butter to keep your blood sugar stable. But how do you guide somebody in making friends? It's tougher. One thing I found in my own life is to really lower my standards for how I host people. So like some people think hosting means you like break out the fine china and you go grocery shopping and you cook a meal for people and you like light a candle. And that would be lovely. I love when people host me in that way, but it's not practical or realistic when you're busy. So I think you lower your standards. What we do in my household is we're like, come over, we'll be ordering takeout, the end. And we basically just open our front door. That's the degree of effort that we do. We don't even clean up. So it's like, if you can start to get comfortable with having people over to a messy home to eat takeout food, good quality takeout food, and then you're having a social connection with a really low activation energy. So you're just making it's just more readily possible in your life.
Yeah, that's one of my goals right now. I have like an apartment in West Hollywood, but my goal is to have a house or just like a space where I can entertain and have people over, because that's actually like one of my favorite things to do is to like cook with friends.
Yeah.
Right now I cook a lot with my brothers, but they don't really cut it in terms of conversation.
Well, I live in New York City. We have no dining room table to speak of, and we host people multiple times a week. We sit on couches and like a beanbag chair on the floor. So there you go. It's nothing fancy.
Yeah.
You just need some kind of like setting where people can gather.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
When you really understand the big paradigm that we're in this dimension, it's fascinating to me that you will get the circumstances that are perfectly customized for your own evolution.
Yes. So true.